So today we're going to discuss, last time we were discussing, first lecture, we were discussing suffering human beings, suffering us, our anxious heart. Last week we were discussing suffering love, suffering us, anxious love. And today I'm going to talk mostly about suffering world and anxious everything. That's why it's the last lecture. There's nowhere to go from here. So if you remember the chart that we started with about suffering humans, the position of mostly existential philosophy and psychoanalysis to some extent, the negative part of psychoanalysis, that unlike common sense and unlike psychology, common psychology would talk about our anxious core, that if we dig deeper into us, we won't discover any health, harmony. We'll discover, on the contrary, depression, anxiety, and other kinds of suffering. And today I would like to claim that it's not only at the core of human being, but if we look at it from the other angle, it's possible that what we feel within us is a suffering universe, suffering world, because normally this position in philosophy and this position in psychoanalysis too presupposes that this suffering core, anxious heart, is something that separates us from other living creatures, something that makes us unique in the world, and to some extent privilege, gives us this privileged position of suffering beings deviated from natural order. So we are suffering, we are anxious because we deviate from the natural order. And other animals, other living creatures from this position, quite traditional positions, would be seen as blissful, as not suffering, or suffering in the normal extent, alike humans. And I would like to argue through other thinkers, showing them from the different point of view from what they're normally seen, that it's not only our heart that is anxious, it may be the universe as such that is anxious. And we can see the standard, more or less traditional position in Nietzsche, who claims that humans are the most sick animal, seriously ill. Presupposing from this position, we can see that he presupposes that there is less suffering, more normal, more harmonious creatures, and which is other animals, and humans are kind of sick, ill. That's why they suffer. That's why they anxious. Alenka Zupancic mentions and discusses Nietzsche along with Lacan in her book What is Sex, and we'll come back to Lacan and her interpretation a little bit further. But she also claims that, Alenka Zupancic also claims that there is this other position in Nietzsche, which is quite progressive for his time, because he also suggests this different understanding of nature, which is even beyond, to some extent, position of evolution and perception of nature through the prism of evolution, because he claims that what we have to do is we have to get rid of the perspective, theological and teleological perspective in our view of what nature is, meaning theological perspective to get rid of God within our perception of nature, and evolutionary perspective, Darwin perspective, even though it's quite pessimistic and depressing, it still, we will talk about this later, it still presupposes God, it still presupposes some goal, still presupposes health and adaptation and all the goal-oriented features, which actually one can say that more progressive evolutionary view, that evolution, nature lacks all of that. So this is what Nietzsche was arguing for, to get rid of everything that has to do with God, with theology and teleology in nature, meaning nature doesn't have purpose. He also claims that there is no purpose nor necessity in nature, but also there is no like opposite things in nature. For example, we can't claim, according to him, that there is no health, but also there is no deviation from health. There is no illness in nature, because those work as two opposites. And I won't listen to Nietzsche today. I would claim that there is sickness in nature. We can claim, just it's easier that way to claim that and not only human is sick creature. There is no ideal types of animals that are healthy, that are natural. There is nothing this way harmonious, in way understanding nature as harmony. There is no such thing as natural harmonious nature. So, and there is only kind of chaos for Nietzsche and nature. And if we dare again naturalize human and claim that humans are natural precisely in this way, in this understanding of nature that is deprived of God, we can claim that humans are natural. Precisely, they're natural by being sick, by being all chaotic, by not being healthy. And we can also extend it to other animals and other living beings, claiming that they are also not healthy, not harmonious. They are merely more result of chaos, not of adaptation, not of any harmony and bliss. Also, Zapfe, my favorite. It's possible to see two positions in Zapfe, and the position that coincides with this traditional position that we saw in Nietzsche, that humans are the most ill, the most sick creatures. We can see it clearly in Zapfe because he claims that, as you remember, human consciousness is overly developed, and you can sense in Zapfe that he positions this distinction between humans as sick creatures because of their overly developed consciousness, because of their depressive character, and because of their being kind of death driven. They want to die. There is this death, the suffering, that they would better be dead. So you can see in Zapfe that it's something that deviates human consciousness and human being as such is something, the deviation from nature, which suggests that there is some normal nature. And this is how he explains the appearance of a human being, that there is something happened, the biological paradox, the absurdity, its excess, disaster of nature that gave birth to human. Nature blows itself apart. Again, this is his description of the birth of human consciousness. Something kind of went wrong in nature. It's excess of nature, the paradox of nature. Nature, the instance where nature got broken, we can say, which suggests that there is harmonious nature which produces normal animals, not absurd like humans. But I would claim, and there is this other side of Zapfe, where he see nature as such as absurd, not only in its human instance, but nature as such is this abnormality, is excess of itself, is depression. It's not only in the heart of human and suffering, but in the heart of world as such. And I like this interpretation of Zapfe much more than the standard one, where human is a deviation. Nature as such is deviation. Nature is such as death-driven, and each creature is a mistake. Each creature is a mistake, deviation, and absurdity, but in its own way. Each species are not adapted. Each species is because all of them potentially, and most of them did extinct already. Those who still exist, including humans, are on their way to extinction. And there are different reasons why. Maybe we can figure out different reasons how they will extinct, why they will extinct, but all of them is just this detour of death. And all of them, we can say, is a specific form of detour of death when towards its coincidence with itself. Zapfe also talks about a special kind of deers. Not only humans are mistake of nature, but he also talks about those deers with overly heavy horns that also extinct precisely because their horns were too heavy, and they were beautiful, but they were bringing them down to the ground, and they were not able to move on, to preserve themselves. He compares this overly developed horns with human consciousness. It's something that brings us to ground our consciousness, makes us depressive, and leads us towards death, that we are better off dead. So at least there are two species, according to Zapfe, that are mistakes of nature. And I would extend it to claiming that there's just nature produces something, making different various forms of mistakes, because each species and each organism is going to die. And there's something also interesting in Zapfe when he claims the problem with this overly developed consciousness is that humans start to feel brotherhood of suffering between everything alive. So we can claim that it's not kind of our suffering, this overly developed consciousness that we feel, but it is also this suffering might be interpreted, and this consciousness might be interpreted as something, as the suffering of the world, the absurdity of the world that we feel, not our own. It's not only our problem, it's also that we are kind of natural in this way, because we are able to feel it. Nature suffers through us. Also, if you remember, when we were talking about Munch picture, painting, the Scream, and it is the standard interpretation of it. When existentialism, existential Heidegger's philosophy is mentioned, is that when Munch, who depicted himself screaming, was on this bridge, he got separated from others, so he felt his anxiety, his anxious heart. He started to scream, obviously the silent scream, and it's normally nature is not mentioned here. If it's mentioned, the very background, if it's mentioned to represent the state of a screaming person. So it's our deviation, the way we see world, the way world changes when we feel our anxious heart. It starts to be terrifying, it starts to be uncanny. But the other interpretation is possible. It's not that not that this is a process of our individualization, separation from other humans, and becoming through this anxiety individuals. It's also possible to say that what Munch here, who depicted himself, started to feel is the suffering of nature. And precisely he would claim, if you read again his description of what is happening here, is yes, he separated himself from friends. He started to feel nature changed around him, but he sensed the infinite scream passing through the nature. So his scream is a scream of nature. And on this painting, it's kind of, if we come back to it, on this painting we can see that he's blending with the rest of the universe, with the nature, with his surrounding. He becomes a part, and his scream is a scream of a nature through him. So it's not his own, again, not that much that it's his own scream and his process of individualization. It's rather that he kind of became, started to be in touch with the suffering of the world, with the scream of the world, and became an instance of this scream. And he would also claim in his diary that in the scream, he depicted his in his blood, he started to feel. He started screaming in his blood, through the through himself. There are also, if you want to do research, there are also some other amazing pictures in Munch, for example, the flower of pain that I forgot to, won't show you today because I forgot to put it in my slides. But you can see the connection of a blood through the ground with the man sitting next to a flower of pain. So he saw this suffering, a suffering nature, and human being as connected through the ways, through their lives with the suffering nature, exchanging its pain with the nature, which is exchanging his life and getting his life at the same time, and dying obviously at the same time. And the other interesting thinker, apart from Zapffe and Nietzsche here, would be Bataille, with his sun energy, with his idea of economy of excess, which represented by the image of a sun. That is, Bataille is normally perceived as a thinker of excess, as a very positive thinker. There is excess, the sun is a representation of excess. It at the same time something that gives life, at the same time something that destroys life, because it's itself on fire. It burns it. This is not how scientifically sun works, but still this image of burning, of something that burns itself and gives life through self-destruction is actually very relevant to see evolution, entropic theory of evolution, how it works, which is more progressive than traditional Darwin's view of evolution. So Bataille is seen as this positive thinker here because of the excess. It's kind of overly over positive, excess of positivity, excess of life. But at the same time, usually this dark side, destructive side of Bataille is noticed less, because this excess is excess of death, it's excess of destruction. Works through destruction. The heart of the world is suffering, is something negative, something destructive. And through this destruction, its excess is the destruction. It's not positive, it's completely negative rather. And Bataille would claim that human being, human life, something that coincides with the universe, the heart of the universe, would be the process of annihilation, the process of death, the process of sacrificing yourself. And that's why the sacrifice plays such a big role in his thinking, because you give this excess, you destroy yourself, and this is how you become in touch with the universe, with your inner kind of nature. So nature is not excessive and life, not that you becoming more alive, but you and getting something. It's rather you sacrificing yourself. You go through process of self-destruction, annihilation. This is how you coincide with the life, with the principle of a universe. And similar to Zapffe, we can find position in Bataille, who claims that human being itself is not the contemplation, it's not the something positive, we can say. It's not life-driven creature. It's rather this madness, war, anguish, and supplication at the heart of human. So when you, again, this depressive realism position, if you dig deeper into yourself, you discover not happiness, life, and positivity. You would discover self-destruction. You will discover anguish. You'll discover anxiety. And this is how, precisely through this, you coincide with the universe, the principle of a universe, this excessive negativity, destruction as such. Which means for Bataille that it is kind of romanticization of suffering, but different kinds of suffering. So it's not that we have to cause suffering to others, or we have to, I don't know, promote kind of suffering. We have to, but again, it's different kind of suffering, different kind of war, different kind of anxiety. Not for Bataille, it would be not that much the suffering that we cause others, not externalized, because when we cause suffering to others, we want to, when we don't feel it in ourselves, but it's not self-destructive act, not act of self-sacrifice. It's escape from the suffering when we kind of want to protect ourselves and externalize suffering, cause suffering to others. It's rather the proper suffering, the one that coincides with the suffering of the universe, was destruction of the universe. It's to sacrifice yourself, to go through this excess. The gift, the idea of a gift would not only give, but again, any ethical act that we don't see our own profit in it. It's not profitable. It's genuinely self-destructive, genuinely giving something, destroying yourself, not for any kind of profit or for any kind of protection of suffering, from suffering, but genuinely tragic and ethical at the same time act. Of course, the radical form of it would be death, complete self-sacrifice, but maybe it's not necessary. There are other forms too. Bataille doesn't actually like the idea of people killing each other and dying themselves, because paradoxically, complete death would be getting rid of a death. So if you completely dead, or if we kill someone and the other person is dead, it won't be this coincidence with the universal self-destruction, because it will be the end of destruction. So death is the end of, you're not able to die further if you physically dead, or if other person is physically dead. So you have to suffer while you're alive. You have to extend this death while you are alive. And if we come back to Lacan, as I promised, Alenka Zupancic, again, in her book, What is Sex? When she discusses Nietzsche, she also talks about psychoanalytic, precisely Lacanian understanding of the difference between animals and between humans. And she points out that in Lacan, we can find, again, similar to Nietzsche, to this more simple interpretation of Nietzsche, understanding of humans as not as deviated creatures, as maladapted, unlike which presupposes that there are other creatures, other animals that are not part of the symbolic world, that are not kind of castrated, and that are adapted. And human, so there is this idea of human exemption from the harmony of the world in Lacan. And the carrier of this human exception would be the death drive, right? So humans, unlike the other animals who don't participate in the symbolic world, are not death-driven. They are rather life-driven, normal, we can say. But again, Alenka Zupancic brings this psychoanalytic idea further, precisely Zizek's idea that it's not only human being that is incomplete, that is maladapted, but also reality is such, including the reality of nature, that is incomplete, that there is this maladaptation in the nature, incompleteness of nature, and each living creature is a rather instance of this, of a death-driven, incomplete universe. So not only human being is death-driven, but we can say that nature as such and reality as such is death-driven, driven by destructions and incompleteness. And also in Lacan, there is this interesting point about suffering of plants. So he talks about lilies, the image from the Bible, the image of blissfulness, right? The way it's normally interpreted, the biblical image. He talks about jouissance of a lily, but meaning that it's infinitely painful to be a plant. So it's the opposite position to the normal depressive realism position, that it's us who have anxious heart and who suffer more because of there are various options why it's so. For Zapffe is overly developed consciousness, and for many others pessimistic existential philosophers, thinkers, we suffer because there is some overdevelopment of us. We're too smart, or we are ill, like for Nietzsche, but we overcompensating with it. Even for Freud, there is something wrong with us, but we are maladapted animals, but we build civilization to compensate for it. So we kind of build some kind of greatness to compensate for the absence of natural greatness or normality in us. In this quote, and in some instances of Lacan, it's the opposite. It's that not we are the most anxious one. And Lacan also has a similar idea that he takes from Heidegger, that anxiety, romanticizing even anxiety, claiming that we have this anxious heart, and anxiety is specifically human affect, and anxiety is the only truth affect, something that doesn't lie. So it's coincidence with reality, but we can see it from the different perspective, relying on this passage. Because what if our ability to feel anxiety or to talk about it, to feel it, is on the contrary something that makes us suffer less? Precisely our ability to feel it means to feel anxiety, means to suffer less than, for example, a plant. So the opposite to Zapffe kind of idea, still depressive, even more depressive, because what if our deepest suffering is still, in comparison to suffering of the universe and suffering of a lily, is reduced suffering? What if there is, of course, it depends from scientific point of view. It depends how we define suffering and how we define pain. And there is discussion going on if animals or plants are able to feel pain. But it again depends how we define it. But just as experiment of thought, what if we'll claim that the world suffering extensively to such extent that it's not even able to feel it, unlike us who suffer less because we at least are able to externalize it, to feel it, to transform it into a feeling of pain. So what if it's not reduction? What if it's on the contrary? What if it's what if it's not exaggerated pain, but reduced pain in comparison to other living and non-living even creatures and things? And to come back to idea of evolution, Dennett in his book, just quite a good book, and it's not fashionable to maybe talk about Daniel Dennett, but still he claimed in his book on Darwin, he claimed here that unlike theological and teleological perspective that existed before evolutionary perspective, that was there was more hope in it, there was more meaning in it, it was less depressive maybe perspective. The perspective of evolution ruined everything. So within the theological perspective, there was a privilege of a human being who was better than other animals on the top of the chain of something. There was a goal, right? There was a goal of improvement. There was right and wrong, and evolution ruined. There was God's plan for us and place it in hierarchy. Everything was more or less clear and was going. There was a hope that it will end well with eternal existence somewhere in heaven. And human being was created as the image of God. So it was cool. Before evolution, the perspective of evolution stepped in, which Dana describes existentially depressive and absurd, because there is no, from the perspective of evolution, doesn't give any meaning, any purpose. It just assumes that world from a position of a meaning of and purpose is just absurd. But still we can claim, and some researchers do and did, that perspective of Darwinian perspective of evolution, it's still too hopeful, and still there are some teleological aspects to it, because there is still, even though there is no existential meaning, but there is still idea of improvement, idea of adaptation, of possible harmony, and the goal of survival, at least. So it's still, and for Darwin himself, he preserved the idea of a progress. And when we talk about evolution, it's even a question of whether evolution, because it's synonymous with, as a word, synonymous with progress. We can even ask, is evolution, idea of evolution, possible without the idea of a progress? So Darwinian initial idea of Darwinian idea of evolution actually implies lots of things that that is still teleological, still gives hope. And for Darwin himself, human being, human morality was the goal of evolution. So it's still quite biblical story, and each species this perspective that they are adapted, and they are there is ideal type of a certain species that is resembles the Platonic ideals, Platonic ideas. So there is this idea of certain animals, same like from the Bible, that God created certain animal, certain type. So there are still lots of optimism and lots of some hope in Darwin's idea of evolution, even though Darwin himself, of course, it's more pessimistic than theological, biblical story of the world. But, and even though Darwin himself was a quite depressive person, because maybe one of the reasons that discovering evolution and the way species evolved, he had to change his own views of the world, because initially he was a religious person, but still it's not depressive enough. And what is depressive enough is more maybe recent elaboration of theories of evolution. For example, anthropic theory of evolution, which is sometimes the idea of punctuated equilibrium is called, which is Gould, Stephen Jay Gould theory, that presupposes, that kind of looks on the nature, on the evolution from the dark side. Unlike Darwin himself, who didn't pay attention to, who just concentrated on adaptation, on improvement, that everything is getting better, getting more evolved, meaning more adapted, more elaborated, but ignored, because of this perspective, still teleological, ignored the meaningless processes in evolution and destructive processes in evolution. And the theory of punctuated equilibrium or theory of anthropic evolution would claim that it's rather the interactions that are central to evolution, and the rapid changes, destructive changes that are accompanied by those periods of stability or stasis that are central. So we can take a look on evolution from the more depressive point of view and see those aspects of evolution that are normally considered as central, as secondary. So evolution as death-driven, not as life-driven. And life, what do we call life or progress, or I just more like our imposed point of view, or secondary byproducts, but not the central processes. And Gould would also claim that talking about extinction that is going on. So it's not only development, it's not only that through perspective of death, of life, we can take a look on evolution, the improvement of life and the success of life. But what if the other process, the destruction of life, the extinction that is going on too, is a central process, and it has its own completely different rules from the rules that we tend to associate with evolution, seeing them as central for evolution. Because when disaster happen, when cataclysms happen in evolution, it doesn't matter to what extent something is seen as adapted to environment, because it just doesn't matter. It happens, it's a disaster precisely because it doesn't matter. It just something might just destroy, and no matter how well adapted the creature could be seen to the environment, it still can be, still because of some external reasons, so for no which is for no reason at all, it can be destroyed, and it is destroyed. And it's not only about cataclysms, the global cataclysms in nature, it's also about inner processes, micro cataclysm within the organism, right? It's not goal directed. It might be seen from this other dark perspective as excessively destructive, and not aimed at survival at all, but rather forms of destruction. Organisms are different forms of destruction and survivals of the not adapted creatures, but survivals of the disaster. And there is, I think it's last thing, the paper that I really like on that suggests this different view of evolution, claiming that accusing Darwin that he didn't pay enough attention to catastrophes, to these negative processes of evolution, and suggesting that it is catastrophic events, not the positive selection of living beings that are more adapted, that are better. It is rather, evolution is rather driven by catastrophic events, and that are random and not driven by positive selection. So we can say that it's possible to claim that not only us that are suffering, it's not only us that are anxious in our heart, but not only us that are death-driven, unlike other blissful animals, life-driven and not suffering, and nature as such as harmonious, and we are deviation from it. We can claim that it's by our suffering, our own heart makes us natural, in a sense that it's nature that is death-driven, and each living organism, maybe even non-living organism, is a production result of this excess of death, of excess of destruction, different form how death, destruction brings itself to coincide with itself in its various forms. It's not only humans, not only deers with excessively heavy horns, but also nature as such, any other living being, living creature as such, is the instance of world's anxiety, of world's suffering. And maybe our suffering is the maybe not the reduction, maybe not we are blessed in our suffering, but just it's a different instance of suffering, unlike the suffering of lilies, for example. So that's all for today. If you have questions or answers, I'll be glad to hear them. Anyone? So I hope all this means that we all agree to all this suffering. Anyway, we can postpone discussion for our next meeting, which won't be recorded and live streamed. next meeting, same time on Saturday, when we'll be able to discuss everything you were discussing. And also we can have some kind of chat and imitation, at least, of group psychotherapy when we will talk about Marcus here.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
You can hear me?
Yeah, David.
Okay. I mean, you're basically saying that entropy is basically the death drive. But I mean, you can just keep taking that back and back. I mean, you can start saying subatomic particles are death-driven. The Big Bang is like the beginning of the death drive. I mean, I really like what you're saying, but it kind of just keeps going back. I mean, do you know what superdeterminism is?
No.
Okay, it's just that everything that happens, all of us, all the stuff you're talking about, Lacan, et cetera, you know, the human beings suffering, the way that we're dislocated, whatever he calls it, jouissance by the symbolic order. I mean, all of this is just going to happen. And everything that we project onto it, that you are projecting onto it, is just a human projection onto something that is just going to happen anyway. I mean, it's not really a question. It's just something I kind of think about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's so it might be, when we talk about suffering, it might be criticized and the world as suffering might be criticized rightfully for it's anthropocentric worldview, because and it was criticized, this position, because we take human feelings and
project them onto I mean, yeah. I mean, there are people who say that, you know, subatomic particles have feelings. I mean, I don't believe that, but I mean, it's almost like what we are, and all of this Lacanian, Freudian stuff. I mean, I love it, you know. It's just beside the point. It's just, this is going to happen anyway. We are what atoms do. I mean, if you want to put it that way. I mean, we're going to psychoanalyze atoms. It's not going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I love it. I love Freud, and I mean, kind of like Lacan. I mean, it's just like reading. Somebody says like reading Mallarmé. I mean, it's nice. It's like poetry. But to me, what you're talking about is basically mapping human feelings onto something that is just going to happen anyway, which is basically a super deterministic, you know, way of looking at the universe. It's all going to happen. There's nothing we can do about it. I mean, I love it. You know, Darwin, his whatever you want to call it, his evolution is actually death-driven. I mean, it's a great idea. You know, I like it. I like a load of the stuff that you talk about, but you know, it makes me wonder.
Yeah, don't wonder, because it's going to happen anyway.
Because what?
Because it's going to happen anyway. What's the point?
Yeah, I mean, it's not dull. I mean, you cannot avoid what. I mean, the thing. It seems to me that you're talking about with your necroanalysis. I mean, I really like it, but I also think, like, if you have a person, I mean, one of your clients, for instance, who is suicidal, really suicidal, his whatever you want to, however you want to put it, his symbolic order or whatever, his relationship to the symbolic order is crashed. His quotidian consciousness is destroyed. I mean, to me, it's like, I like it. I like the way that whatever you guys, Lacanians and people, talk about this. It's lovely, but what do you do with that person? I mean, the only guys that I knew who were Lacanian analysts, I mean, just gave me a pair of boots. I mean, it's like, okay. And all of these things that you're describing, like crashing it or the real breaking, whatever you want to call it, the symbolic order apart, is not really going to do much for the guy in the office who's whatever you want to call it, the poetic way that he's staring into the abyss, or the abyss is staring at him. I mean, it's great, but
But again, this point of criticism. So first you claim that it will happen anyway, right? And I'm not aiming to any improvement here, honestly. And which makes me different from psychotherapists and even Lacanian psychotherapists, because they do. And in my view, maybe not stepping into the aim of improvement that fast, or maybe not at all, is actually a genuine position that allows to see depressed person as depressed person. So it's not that we're going to fix it, something wrong with you, but it's, I do understand depression. It happens.
Yeah. It's just like, it's an insane word, depression, because it can mean two things. It can mean I'm not feeling bad, or my whole world is shattered. Everything that, and this is, I understand what you're saying. You're not trying to adapt this person back into the world. You're trying to, basically, I don't know what you're trying to do. I mean, basically, you just talk to them, I guess. I mean, what do you do with like a high-risk suicide patient? What do you say? You don't start talking about the. I mean, I'm basically asking you a question. I'm not criticizing you. I mean, you're a psychoanalyst, I think.
Yeah, I think too, but I'm negative one, and I'm different. But
yeah, okay. But I mean, is your aim to bring these? I don't know who you see. I mean, do you see psychotics? Do you see really clinically depressed people?
Well, I'm also honest about not helping, and there is a different category of people who turn to me, and maybe if they need help, they would seek for help somewhere else. But I might help, but not as an aim, but as a byproduct, by accident. Because Todd McGovern, who is a Lacanian psychoanalyst, he's not practicing psychoanalyst, but he said amazing thing about his own depression, how he got better. Because when he was depressed, later, he's not depressed now, but he said he realized that he was depressed precisely because he thought that he's not supposed to be depressed, that there was something wrong with him. Understanding that it's, not something wrong, but this is how it is. This is
I mean, it's great. I mean, all of that is great, but to me, a person who is depressed, I mean, clinically, what is called clinically depressed, I hate these terms, but a clinically depressed person has been smashed apart by something that they could find depressing. I mean,
David,
what?
Can I interject, if that's okay?
Hi, Mark.
Hi, how are you?
Right on time for discussion.
Yeah, I thought it was earlier. Sorry, I thought it was later. I was at 8 o'clock. I apologize, I would have been here, but no, David, so your critique is the limitations of looking at Lacanian analysis, and
it wasn't critique.
A question.
No. I know, or I have known Lacanian analysts, okay, and talked to them in great detail, certainly about what would be called extreme altered states. Which I was, at one point when I was young, I was kind of in one and interested in one. Or now I'm kind of more interested in it. And many years, Jacques Lacan, I've only looked at on YouTube, but it's great. I mean, I really like it. I mean, I also like him. Lacan's style of driving, for instance, and his antics. I mean, it's funny. But yeah, I'm basically more interested in Julie's method. I mean, it's not any of my business. If the way that she treats her clients, and people who are really desperate, the wretched of the earth. I mean, you get some guy. They know nothing. It's just like, this hits them like a thunderbolt. These people haven't read Freud. They have nothing to connect what's happening to them. They're just desperate. They're destroyed. And it's like, I say, okay, and basically kind of saying, okay, what do you do with a person like that? And to me, it's like you give them a piece, like you give them a cake and a cup of tea and just say, hey, let's talk.
I think from what I've read, Julie's work, and to me, I think there's the other way of approaching it, and it's about looking at the limitations of what's offered. And I think that, to me, if you look at the hyper-therapeuticized language that seems to saturate all aspects of, everything's about this sort of hyper-therapeutic reality and toxic positivity. Get well, self-help, pick yourself up, stretch yourself up by your socks. That in itself, without any semblance of reflexivity, ends up being ultimately more damaging. And what Julie tries to do is offer another perspective and say, you know what, you're suffering, and you know what, it's okay. That to me seems to be
okay. Yeah, that's like giving them a cup of tea and saying, let's have a chat.
It's not that.
Oh, I feel she gives a good cup of tea.
No, and I'm not.
It's not, but it's not.
Really not criticizing that. But again, I mean, like if you look at people like Thomas Sachs, I mean, years and years ago, I read it and I just was really laughing at his the way that he was treating his clients. I mean, he was saying, like a guy who comes in to see him in his whatever it is consulting room and says, I'm Jesus or whatever. Sachs says the clinical psychiatry would say to this guy, you're a schizophrenic, or this guy's schizophrenic. Sachs says, no, you're a liar. I mean, it's like brutal.
Sachs is more from a moral position. He was actually very conservative. He didn't like therapeutic discourse, and he wanted to bring it back to moral, which is even worse. Both suck, in my view.
Do you really think that? Somewhere I heard that Jacques Lacan actually really liked Thomas Sachs.
Really?
Yeah, really.
I think.
I mean, yeah. I mean, I'm just talking bullshit here. I'm just yabbering on. But I mean, I was just really interested. I really like what you say. I mean, I really like all the references to Heidegger. I like Monk. I love Dostoevsky. I haven't read it for a long time, but I love Dostoevsky. And I really like what Freud said about Dostoevsky. He's saying, well, he put him in the pecking order of literature just below Shakespeare, the greatest of all time. But then he said, I can't remember exactly, but he said, but there's something about him that I really don't like. I see people like this in my consulting room every day. I was really laughing, Anyway.
I really like those who criticize psychology, psychiatry, like Philip Reeve. He's the most famous one to criticize the psychological approach to the world, but I don't like the presupposition. Why? Because they have this intention of getting rid of therapeutic societies, that is society that treats everyone as a potential patients of psychotherapy. And they try to bring it back to moral society, to morality with its own problems and its own optimistic view. And I would agree with criticism of therapeutic society and psychiatry and all this approach, but not trying to be conservative in it, not trying to go back somewhere.
Conservative. I mean, the guys that I knew who were analysts, they were really. They didn't think that they were doing anything. They just said the universe is meaningless. This doesn't have any meaning. But maybe we can just like get this guy, like having a little bit of peace in his life, or her life. They weren't kind of thinking they were, going to cure this guy, and certainly not that they were going to get him, into normal, doing a job and a happy guy, get married with kids. I mean, they weren't like that at all. And I personally cannot imagine Thomas Sachs being like, what about the manufacture of madness? I mean, he didn't believe in madness at all. He thought it was a construction, back from whatever it is, the Inquisition. I'm sorry, I'm just bullshit. I'm just yabbering on. I'm talking about freestyle.
Mark, you look like you want to say something.
No, it's just what's it called. I've come in late, and I really apologise. I thought it started at 8 p.m, but my 8 p.m is not your 8 p.m. or someone's not. I'm missing someone's 8 p.m, so I apologise for that. No, I think for me and I've been depressed, David. Horrifically depressed. And for me, what psychoanalyst offers, and I know that Julie has criticisms of psychoanalysis and takes the idea of the negative, but for me, it's a space where, and I think that there is no injunction to enjoy. And I think that what we mean by enjoyment is a large term, and it needs to be explored. But it's this idea that it's a space where you can be listened to, and you can figure out how you're attached to your own suffering. And in that process of listening to how you're attached to your own suffering and the various permutations that takes, you can maybe find a way of coping with your own suffering a little bit more. And that to me is the crux of it. It's just it's good. It's to be listened to well, and in this world, that's a difficult thing.
So can I? So when you go for a session of psychoanalysis, do you? Do you start kind of talking to the girl or the woman or the man, etc., etc.? And you say how depressed are you or were you? Were you like suicidal? Were you psychotic?
Yes. No, not psychotic. Yeah. But
like
hysteric. But what's it called? I was in a place of so depression for me is not a feeling, right? So it's not sadness. It isn't sadness. It isn't a feeling. It's a hollowing out. It's a hollowing out of the effective life, and it's a hollowing out of intention to the extent where each and every day you lose the ability to actually distinguish why things are important, right down to the point where you get to the point, why should I even get out of bed? And the thing is, someone could come up to you and say to you, Mark, you're really depressed. You go, no, I'm not. I just don't feel like doing X, Y, or Z. And it's only afterwards when you come out of it, and it does hit you like that sometimes. It does hit you like, there's a moment where you realize that you were depressed. And then when you're out of it and you find the ability to engage in things again, to be able to read books or even go do things, you look back and you realize that, you were depressed. But again, it's Wittgenstein's beacon, isn't it? When we're talking about depression, it's with this clinical depression, there's manic depression. We don't know unless we're, what's it called? What my experience, I'm only talking about what my specific experience of it was, but having the ability to talk to an analyst, and it's very traditional. You lie on a couch, you engage with free association, and then every now and then you get something reflected back to you from your own speech, something that you've said, something that you've repeated, and you go away and reflect on that, and eventually something opens up. And it doesn't happen always, but sometimes it does. But it helped me. It doesn't always help everyone. It's not a cure-all. I think there was Freud said he was bringing the plague. So that's my experience, David. I don't know if that's of any help to you, and you might be skeptical.
It's not. I'm not criticizing or making any point. It's just that I'm trying to think. It's just in my experience of analysis was almost like from total destruction of the self, and I was self-medicating like massively powerful antipsychotic drugs. I just had access to them, and I don't want to go into this too much, but it's like through a guy called Ronald Lang, who just said, just come around the office. I just come around now. And he just said, he was gone. I don't want to talk about this because some of these people are quite famous, but he just sent me to what would be called a Lacanian analyst. And I just sat on the floor. I was just like, and after about 4 hours, he just went louder. And I was like, wow, this guy is cool. And and I just started reeling off this psychotic shit. And he said, the only reason you think, and I'm not going to give you my symptoms, the Martians are after you, is because it's easier for you to think that than that your mother hates you. Or your mother hates you. And it was like, bang. And suddenly I was drawn into this, whatever. And I thought, this guy is very cool. Anyway, I'm going to stop this kind of like.
I think it's really interesting. It's turned into, I'm describing my depression, you're describing yours, and Julie knows it. This is what negative psychoanalysis is.
The only difference I think is like, you never escape that. It's just there with you. But it's just like, you maybe have words that you can say to yourself, okay, well, this is happening. I mean, this abyss, this, like hole of terror, which is basically which basically is at the basis of your subjectivity. It's always there. It's going to be there. It's just like you live with it. But I'm just anyway. I'm just ranting on.
Can you postpone this discussion for next week, because it seems more relevant for next week if you come, Mark? It's going to be 7 p.m. our time. 7
p.m. I promise I will be there, and I apologize. But I will watch. I will now go and watch the rest of the book. I did find the conversation fascinating. But is anyone? I just realised I've come in and started, talking to David and whatever. But has anyone else wanted to chip in or say anything? Anyone?
So Julie, we can talk about some cases or happy to talk about some aspects of own personal analysis as well, given what we are talking today. That would be helpful.
Yeah, next time, right? So I hope to see you all, David, Irving, and Mark, and the rest of you, and young people. So next time, it won't be recorded. Next time won't be live. We'll just chat in closed groups with bringing our own experience of anxiety and depression that won't have helped anyone. I'll see you. Thank you for joining this course and coming here today. I'll see you hopefully next week.
Well, I'll be 7 p.m. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, bye.